Where's everyone going? Bingo?
If a franchise sticks around long enough, it will inevitably be faced with the uphill battle of trying to evolve to meet the needs of an ever-changing landscape. After the half-step toward full 3D in Code Veronica, Capcom struggled to reinvent Resident Evil for a new console generation. An early effort was repurposed and became the brilliant Devil May Cry, but it would take 4 years for a new vision to take shape. When Resident Evil 4 finally hit store shelves for the GameCube in 2005, it forever changed the face of survival horror. Players once again fill the shoes of Leon Kennedy as he searches for the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, in a remote area of Spain. She is being held by a mysterious cult who are actively utilizing a mind-controlling parasite called Las Plagas to gain power. The village that Leon first comes across is filled with infective townsfolk aptly named Ganado, or Herd in English, who are hell-bent on stopping Leon and completely loyal to Osmond Sadler, the leader of the Illuminados cult. Lurking behind the scenes is the familiar face of Ada Wong, who's serving another power and collection of a Plaga sample. Resident Evil 4 continues the tradition of offering an eccentric and ridiculous narrative that successfully links some of the franchise's biggest characters to its events, but also stands well enough on its own that newcomers are not left scratching their heads. The camera departs from the classic pre-rendered tank control style of the older games, and helped pioneer the modern third-person perspective that most games utilize these days. The camera's position obscures some of the action and creates some tense moments while allowing players to enjoy more fluid, natural controls. When aiming his gun or wielding a knife, Leon remains in fixed position, which may seem unnatural to action game aficionados, but it does create some tense moments when groups of enemies converge on Leon's position. With this new control scheme, gunplay is a much bigger focus than in past Resident Evil titles. Enemies come in greater volume, ammo for basic weapons is more plentiful, and there are a few set-piece moments that require you to gun down scores of Ganados lest they tear Leon limb from limb. When it comes to gameplay and combat, the Plagas present a satisfying new angle to the gameplay in Resident Evil. The Ganados function the same as the zombies in prior titles, but with added tenacity and dexterity. They throw axes and dynamite, climb ladders, and leap across small chasms in pursuit of Leon. Additionally, relieving a hapless Ganado of his or her head may not be the end of the fight, since the pesky Plagas are prone to evacuate their hosts and tackle Leon directly, or cowardly emerge from the bloody stumps of their necks, flailing their tentacle-like bodies with guillotine blades attached to a weed eater. The enemies react appropriately to each wound, dropping their weapons or stumbling, rewarding your aim with purpose and control. Shield-bearing cult members and blind mutants with massive claws that must be dispatched by killing the parasites on their backs also refresh the enemy roster and make the combat of Resident Evil 4 reasonably challenging. Several satisfying boss fights provide the cherry on top of the Resident Evil 4 gameplay experience. And the greater focus on action does mean that scares are less frequent than they were in previous entries. Wandering around a hedge maze with Plagas-infested wolves waiting to jump out of the bushes, and seeking keys whilst being pursued by wheezing, seemingly unstoppable regenerators are some of Resident Evil 4's few terrifying highlights during its 3 acts. The 3 acts that Resident Evil 4 is divided into are brilliantly executed, the third however being the weakest by a small margin, leaving a slightly anticlimactic feeling to the game. This handful of minor grimace-worthy moments is largely lost amidst the rest of the experience, which will take most players 15 or more hours on their first playthrough. As if the main campaign wasn't long enough, Assignment Ada offers additional content as a minigame through the 3rd act of the game, collecting 5 samples of the Las Plagas parasite. Mercenaries mode challenges players to survive and kill as many enemies as possible. It's an addictive mode that would go on to become a staple of the franchise by enticing players with a risk-reward system. Stringing together kills gives the player a multiplier, and breaking hourglasses extends the time of the session, providing a greater opportunity to post a high score. It's a challenging variant on the gameplay that requires mastery of each stage to unlock further content and rewards. With these additional modes, it's really easy to get 30 hours or more of entertainment from Resident Evil 4. And if that wasn't enough, the later versions are also offered with the Separate Ways campaign, which acts as a mini scenario B, filling in Ada's perspective of the story with new bosses, viewpoints, and a new area to complete, substantially fleshing out the story. The muted, earth-tone-rich Spanish village that serves as Resident Evil 4's setting is a massive departure from the dark, claustrophobic, and sinister mansion from the first game, and the post-apocalyptic cityscape of the 2nd and 3rd games. When it was first released, Resident Evil 4 was one of the most impressive graphical showcases of the PlayStation 2 and GameCube. With a 1080p resolution and some rescaled textures, Resident Evil 4 looks its age, but is still capable of impressing. The atmosphere is as rich in 2014 as it was in 2005, but we do wish Capcom gave this game the respect it deserves and completely overhauled it in the same way they did with the first Resident Evil game for the GameCube, or at least a true HD port. Resident Evil 4 is a bittersweet experience. Along with Half-Life 2, it helped foreshadow what was to come with the new hardware, as well as perfectly reinvigorating and updating a franchise that was in danger of losing its appeal as new hardware changed gamers' expectations. In doing so, however, Resident Evil 4 shifted the franchise's inertia toward action, and with the next couple installments, Resident Evil would almost entirely forsake its horror roots. With the death of Resident Evil as a horror game, much of the survival horror genre fell into mediocrity, with Dead Space being one of the few titles to successfully straddle the line between action and horror before becoming a victim of the same fate. Resident Evil 4 is one of the greatest games of the new millennium. It maintained enough of the elements of its predecessors to be identifiable as a Resident Evil game, while otherwise reinventing the franchise. Its timeless gameplay, great art direction, and mostly excellent bosses make it very playable almost a decade after its original release. If you haven't played Resident Evil 4 yet, now is as good a time as any.